Thank you so much for your introduction. I should add a disclosure that myself and most of my co-authors are employees of Siemens Healthcare. How do I go on? This is perfect. So thanks to René's nice introduction, I can actually go relatively briefly over the methods at the background. So 2D image navigators, or in short, iNavs, are used for 2D imaging and are required to track or even correct respiratory motion, and have been originally proposed for encoding a true-fist ramp out in 3D segmented whole heart imaging, which means you more or less get the motion information for free, or you can add a low flip-out readout for GRE imaging, and they can be used in, oh, I'm sorry, can I go back? Break button? Ah, the red button, perfect, thank you. And in this study, we're using them together with the variable density Caspar pattern that you've already heard about, and a 3D acquisition scheme looks then more or less like this, where you have for each cardiac segment your spiral and then your little iNav here that corrects, it tracks the motion and then corrects the spiral, so that with 100% scan efficiency, you end up with a motion, or at least translationally motion corrected volume. The implication of doing this in the originally proposed way by encoding a true fist ramp out, there are two implications of this, which is mostly, firstly, your image orientation is tied between the iNav and the 3D imaging, and this is usually then coronal because you need to cover with your iNav the main direction of motion, which is feet-head. And the second implication of this is your 2D iNavs are then projections across the whole imaging slab, because you need to drive your image slab into a steady state. Exactly, and this is how the planning would look like, and here you can see that the projection across the whole slab includes potentially arm signal and chest signal that you don't really need in order to make this image. So the goal of this study was to address both of these implications and implement an orientation-independent, or short IND, iNav framework that decouples the iNav and the 3D imaging, and we've implemented this for spoiled gradient echo imaging. The potential benefits of this is, as I said, you increase the flexibility, so now you actually enable for GRE transversal 3D acquisitions combined with an iNav that still captures the main motion direction, which could be coronal or sagittal, and additionally you avoid potentially avoid unwanted signal in both the iNav and the 3D image by either choosing a thinner slab for your independent iNav, or actually do both. Also have a different 3D acquisition, for example, transversal slab, where you also avoid volume like the shoulders or other things. So the study that we devised was a small pilot study that we devised to test this approach. We compared the conventional approach, which is coronal iNav coronal imaging, with transversal 3D imaging, which has either coronal or sagittal iNavs. And the planning for the coronal setup or the coronal transversal setup can be seen on the right. And again, the conventional iNav has a slab thickness that is equal to the imaging slab thickness, and the independent iNav thickness can actually be significantly smaller, avoiding unnecessary volume. The other imaging parameters in this study, we used a bipolar spoiled gradient echo Dixon readout for fat suppression with the parameters as shown here. The iNav readouts were 14 at a flip angle of 3 degrees. We used the out of phase iNav for actual motion tracking, and the in phase iNav is discarded in this case. 3D imaging used an adiabatic T2 preparation, VD Caspar trajectory with a relatively high undersampling, about 1 millimeter isotropic resolution, and we used a mid-diastolic acquisition window of 100 milliseconds. Reconstruction-wise, we have inline and a live iNav image and motion tracking display on the scanner in real time for each heartbeat. The motion tracking results are applied as a 2D translational correction to the 3D images, meaning we have a 100% scan efficiency. And this is combined with a compressed sensing reconstruction and 2-point Dixon water-fat separation all on the scanner. The subjects in this study, we acquired this data in 5 healthy subjects, at 3 subjects at 1.5 Tesla and 2 subjects at 3 Tesla. Looking at the results, the scan time for all acquisitions, which means all acquisitions pooled for 1.5 Tesla and 3 Tesla, were all below 10 minutes. The INAV image quality was, as expected or as hoped, relatively well, and especially showed the expected enhancements or improvements. If you compare, for example, the conventional INAV here, you have a lot of signal from the shoulders up here, or potentially, this is a thin volunteer, so you don't see as much, but potentially chest signal that projects onto your image that we don't actually have if we use a coronal INAV with a thinner slab, as we do it here. And for the sagittal INAVs, you see similar behavior, although here you have the potential problem that your chest wall also is very close to your volume of interest with the heart. The 3D imaging image quality was good, and motion tracking and correction was successful and comparable in all cases. And here you see the 3 different modalities we use. So conventional INAV compared with the orientation-independent INAV with either coronal or sagittal INAVs. The 3D image quality with respect to SNR appeared visually equivalent or slightly higher for the transversal compared to the coronal acquisitions. I'm showing you now just a brief video of the, it's a bit dark maybe, of the coronal acquisition, of the coronal INAV with the transversal 3D acquisition. So relatively nice delineation of the coronary arteries, and also relatively nice fat suppression with the Dixon. So this is the fat image, obviously. Sorry, this is the fat image, obviously, and this is the water image. Here I'm showing you 2 cases, actually both cases from the 3T study. So on top you see the same thing, the conventional INAV and the transversal 3D imaging coronal 2D INAV imaging with the orientation-independent INAV, and you see relatively similar picture as before. Down here I'm showing you the second case of the 3T acquisition with actually a reformat, so that you can see relatively nicely the proximal coronary arterial system. Again, the fat and the water image, and this is, you could consider a much more challenging subject because you have a lot of fat, but you can see that the fat suppression, again, is very good, and you can nicely delineate and follow all the details in the coronary arteries until relatively far down. Good. With that, I will conclude. So what we've shown and implemented is an orientation-independent 2D image navigation approach for free-breathing 3D whole heart imaging with 100% scan efficiency. This approach improves the flexibility in 3D imaging with respect to orientations and phase encoding, and can reduce the amount of unwanted signal in both INAV and 3D images. And what we're also excited about is that the proposed approach may be extended to enable free-breathing whole heart MRI for other cardiac applications, such as transversal LGE imaging. Okay, and with that, I thank my coworkers and thank you for your attention.